Salts. From your form 2, you remember that a salt is an inorganic compound formed when the cation derived from a base combines with an ion from an acid. A classic example is when sodium hydroxide reacts with hydrochloric acid, it forms sodium chloride and water. In this equation, you will notice that the cation of the salt that has been formed is derived from the base or the alkali, while the anion is derived from the acid. And hence we have sodium chloride. Also back in form 2, you remember that we have preparation of salts. The general methods for preparing salt follow a certain principle. The first question you always have to ask yourself before describing the preparation of any salt is the salt soluble in water? If the answer of that question is yes, then we have 4 methods of preparing soluble salts. Method number 1 is neutralization. This is the reaction between an acid and an alkali, and you have to use an indicator. Method number 2 is the reaction between a basic oxide and an appropriate acid. Method number 3 is the reaction between a metal and an acid, while method number 4 is the reaction between a carbonate or hydrogen carbonate, compound containing hydrogen carbonate, of course, and an acid. So you'll find that here you have to choose the appropriate acid. In this case here it will be just an alkali and an acid. So choose the appropriate acid. For instance, if you're forming sodium chloride, since it is soluble in water, we could first of all use an alkali like sodium hydroxide. And since we know that the base will give us the cation, then we ask ourselves which acid will give us the anion, which is the chloride. That is definitely hydrochloric acid. Let us take, for example, we want to prepare copper 2 nitrate. You know very well that copper is lower than hydrogen in the reactivity series, and its oxide is insoluble. So we'd use a basic oxide such as copper 2 oxide, which will give us the copper, that is the base, and an acid that will give us the nitrate, which is definitely nitric 5 acid, and so on and so forth. Now, if the answer is no, then we have one method to use, which is known as precipitation method. In this method, you'll need to take two soluble salts and you react them together to yield one insoluble salt that we are interested in and another soluble salt. So this calls us to remember the solubility of salts. We'll have to choose, for instance, if you were to create or to prepare something like lead chloride, for example, we know very well that this is insoluble in cold water. Therefore, we'd have to choose a soluble salt that contains lead ions and another soluble salt that contains chloride ions. So an example of a soluble salt that contains lead ions could be lead nitrate. An example of a soluble salt that contains chloride ions could be potassium chloride. Now I'm choosing potassium because I know that when the precipitation takes place, there would be exchange of anions and would form lead chloride, which would mean that these lead ions will come and combine with chloride ions, and essentially the potassium ions will combine with the nitrate ions to form products of lead 2 chloride and potassium nitrate. And potassium nitrate is soluble salt. Lead chloride is insoluble salt. So that is the general principle of precipitation method. We have to choose two salts that are all soluble, and when we carry out precipitation method, when you mix them together, they would form one insoluble salt and one soluble salt.